Here's what you missed on Formas. We've learned about how abstraction is
corrupt, scandalous,
psychology, how cerebral,
and furniture, quite utilitarian. But on today's episode, we will be discussing how abstraction can be queer.
I'm Mason, a sculpture student, and this is my talented co-star, Leslie.
I'm Leslie, a textile student. Let's hop right into things. How can any art, let alone abstract art, be queer?
Well, Leslie, that's a fantastic question. It might be odd to think of a genre or style of art making as a way to talk about experiences of sexuality and gender, but I think what primes abstraction to tackle these themes is its capacity to describe the illegible. As a mode of art making, it is defined by resistance to representation. Like queerness, abstraction defies a single interpretation. In a world where being cis and hetero represents the default, the legible, queerness represents the alternative, the less defined, the more fluid. Essentially, the abstraction of the boring, same old norm. No offense to all my straight cis people out there.
Mason, you can't say that. You're going to alienate our audience. We still need those LGBTQ allies to subscribe to the Formas channel too.
Okay, fine. Let me put it this way. Maybe abstraction is the spicy, more fabulous cousin of representational art, which is also valid. You know, nothing wrong with another still life of fruit. How was that, Leslie?
I think we're getting there. Representational art wore the school uniform in middle school, but abstraction is the kid that pulled up in the gender-neutral jelly sandals and wore their shirt inside out. How about that?
Spot on. Okay, I think we're getting a little off script here. Let's give the people what they're here for.
Right. By the end of this video, our goal is to flip, or shall I say invert, if you know, you know, Joaquin Torres Garcia inverted America, your preconceived notions on abstraction being a purely cisgendered and heterosexual art genre. Today we will discuss the works of Gordon Hall, Félix González-Torres, Paul Morabito, and last but certainly not least, Laura Aguilar. To start us off, I will give the mic to Mason, who will discuss the wonderful work of Gordon Hall in great detail.
So who is Gordon Hall? Well, to start off, they're a quintuple threat. They're a working artist, educator, writer, dancer, and sculptor. Hall's work explores how objects can tell us more about our own bodies than other typical representations of literal bodies. The sculptures they create rarely exist in a vacuum, and often these objects are accompanied by writing and/or performances. Hall's perspective on, quote, the increased acceptance and visibility of non-heterosexual sexualities and non-normative genders challenges the desire for respectability and legibility. They use abstraction to reject a legible self-identification as their price of admission. As we gain visibility, we're expected to define ourselves and identify ourselves, to make ourselves legible according to terms that continue to multiply. There are many things valuable in an embrace of silence and blankness as strategies of resistance. The term queer gets used in so many different incompatible ways that its meaning has become confounded, thus losing much of its usefulness. Sculpture speaks to the tangible, the felt, the experiential in a way that discourses of respectability and acceptance simply cannot. Abstraction, and abstract works by queer artists, open the door to a new way of being. There is value in struggling to understand. Representation can reinforce the familiar, but the queerness of abstraction asks us to surrender our insistence for a single, easy conclusion.
Beautifully said, Mason.
And I think now is a great time for Leslie to cover another fabulous artist who is also thinking about the body, but in terms of an evolving and complex set of relationships. Welcome to the stage, Laura Aguilar.
Laura Aguilar pioneered current-day notions on body and queer and cultural identity for many, that she only began to receive the praise and recognition she so greatly deserved towards the end of her life. Unlike many artists at the time, 1970s, Aguilar's subjects in her works consist of plus-sized bodies, typically of Mexican-American descent. The sincere nature of her photography often made the spectator uncomfortable. Her works beautifully articulated the hardships of queer women of color and the displacement felt. Aguilar is best known in the art school world for her nature self-portrait series. And like many abstract artists who were concerned with producing art in relation to purity, think of Mondrian, Aguilar had a purity-like approach to her making. She worked beyond the canvas. She worked with nature and deviated from typical notions of purity and nature.
It seems like Aguilar is weaving together and disrupting our notions of space, nature, and the body. She wasn't interested in making work that sat comfortably or had a singular takeaway.
Speaking of weaving, our next artist is a contemporary textile artist, also picking up the threads of this queerness question.
Paul Morabito is another artist who is non-binary, thinking about themes of temporality and queer culture. Morabito describes their practice as, quote, a release from the tyranny of the present, a look toward a future past horizon where one can exalt queer grace. Their weavings often appear to fall into formlessness, allowing the threads of their work to drape towards the floor. Morabito refers to these hanging, unwoven ends as tangents. As put by the artist, the notion of the tangent acts as a central methodology for my work. Linguistically, tangents are divergent ideas that spring out from one line of thought to follow their own direction. Tangents are deviations, tangents are disruptions, tangents are queer. Morabito has two main tapestry series, the Magnificat series, which reference high Renaissance painting and pop culture. This series imagines a queer divinity, invoking the image of Madonna as a, quote, drag figure in queer culture and religion. There is also the Four Felix tapestries, which reference the beaded curtain works of Félix González-Torres, who just happens to be the next artist in our lineup. The unwoven ends of this series emphasize the notion of the tangential, leaving space for infinite next futures.
Like and unlike Morabito in idea, González-Torres tackled notions of finding peace and reassurance of existing as a queer person, specifically with the AIDS epidemic. The main themes reflected in the works are love and loss, sickness, and gender and sexuality. With the use of intersectionality, González-Torres relied on the spectator to also come up with their interpretation of his work. Although González-Torres relied on seemingly mundane objects to make up his work, these objects provoked thought because of their poetic display. And like many abstract artists before him, González-Torres felt it was essential to include the spectator in the work. The spectator was a part of the work. His goal was to remind the spectator that loss and grief with loved ones are bound to happen, but how we find ways to have them live on in our lives is the true beauty of life.
All in all, today we've learned a lot about the harmonious relationship between queerness and abstract art.
The non-representational or distortions of real life can hold great political, personal, and poetic weight. It was nice talking to y'all.
Slay.
Slay.